Welcome to this week's three-part vidcast. The first section discusses biographies, autobiographies, memoirs, and all kinds of books that feature sports, including fiction and nonfiction. This week, we'll focus on biographies and autobiographies for young adults. In addition, we'll examine the research that supports the use of graphic novels with teens to promote reading in all types of libraries. I'll start by talking a little bit about the history of biographies. The term was actually introduced back in the 17th century, 1683, when John Dryden wrote Plutarch's Parallel Lives. The term was new, but people had been reading biographies mostly about army generals, politicians, and religious leaders for a long time. Biographies at this time were predominantly about white men. By the time the 60s rolled around, biographies were often about inventors, statesmen, soldiers, and business leaders. Still, the trend of it just being about men, and as I said, predominantly white men, continued. So from the 17th century to the 1960s, there wasn't much of a change in who was being featured in biographies. Rosemary Chance's name has come up in several previous vidcasts. She has a textbook out on young adult materials, and she writes extensively on young adult literature. She points out in her book that biographies and autobiographies allow people to vicariously experience others' lives. When they read about historical figures, they can explore the time or the events related to the figures they're reading about. It helps them understand not just history, but human nature, and why people act the way they act or do the things they do. As you saw in the previous vidcast on nonfiction, there are plenty of biographies and autobiographies in publication. Some of these on the screen were part of the podcast that I mentioned to you, but I wanted to call attention to some others. You can see that musicians are covered with John Lennon and Janis Joplin, a ballerina, civil rights issues with Marian Anderson and Satchel Paige, even a magician with the Houdini title. I want to show you a wide range of biographies that are available for you to share with your teens. There are different types of biographies and categories of biographies. A biography is a book written about a person by another person. An autobiography is a biography written by a person about themselves. And then memoirs are when a person writes about themselves but focuses on a very specific period of time. A good example is Jacqueline Woodson's Brown Girl Dreaming, where she talks more about her childhood. Collective biographies are biographies where there's a chapter on each person. The people featured may share something in common, such as the same careers or interests. It could be military heroes, it could be musicians, and then biographies in a series are very popular. There are many publishers who created series that come out quarterly with different titles. This is a bulleted list of some of the reasons we should put biographies in the hands of teens. I know I used to have a science teacher who would bring her students in every year to read biographies of scientists because she wanted them to learn more about some of the great scientists in the field. An autobiography is written by a person about him or herself. There are pros and cons to that. The pro is that the person knows more about themselves than anyone else in the world, but the con is that they may sort of spruce it up a little bit, and they're not totally objective in their writings. So it's not always trustworthy. You need to make students aware of the fact that people can doctor themselves up in an autobiography, or there are actually professionals hired to do that for celebrities. We call them book doctors or ghostwriters. I already mentioned that memoirs are unique to a specific period in a person's life. Two examples on the screen. Jack Gantos, the author of Joey Pigsa series, has written Hole in My Life, in which he discusses how he very foolishly sailed a boat full of drugs and got caught and served time in prison. And then Stitches by David Small is a fabulous graphic novel about his life. He lived in a very dysfunctional home, and it's an amazing story of his childhood. So both of those are two very different books that fall into the category of memoirs, as did Brown Girl Dreaming with Woodson's childhood. Collective biographies can be great for teens because these expose students and patrons to several individuals they might not otherwise encounter. Each chapter highlights one individual. Sometimes the authors will include people that might not be the best known in the field. Therefore, teens can learn about individuals who may be previously ignored in their classroom lectures. It's a great way if students are interested, say in history, to give them some of the great military leaders, or if they're into musicians, some famous musicians. Series biographies tend to be shorter in length and more formulaic. These can help students develop reading competency because they get used to the formula, the pattern that's in the repeated series. There's research that suggests these types of publications help those who struggle with reading develop a sense of comfort and familiarity, helping them want to come back to those books over and over again, and helping them get excited about reading the next book to learn about another biographical figure. I just want to touch on shelving biographies for a minute because it is very different than it is for a lot of other categories. You may go into a collection and see that all biographies are categorized with a letter B for biography, and then the first three letters of the person's last name. Or you may go to the next library and biographies are shelved in 921, the Dewey Decimal System number for this category. The collective biographies are typically in the 920s. I've heard about librarians, and I've experienced it myself, becoming frustrated because they go into a job and it's done in the 921, but they prefer it done in the Bs, or issues with vendors sending in the wrong categorization if you don't designate your preference clearly early enough, forcing you to redo the labels and recatalog it all to your system. So be aware, if you're going to be starting a collection, you have to decide which way you're going to go. Let's change gears and talk about sports as a genre for young adults. Sports can be written in a lot of different ways, both as nonfiction and fiction. For example, sports can be a fictional story that emphasizes the importance of being a good sport. Or sports can be biographies, autobiographies, and memoirs about famous athletes. This genre can talk about the trials and tribulations of those who want to participate and succeed. I'm sure you've all heard the story of Michael Jordan not making his basketball team when he was in high school. Teens like to read about these types of things. This genre includes how-to books, how to play soccer, statistics about sports, or other informational books. Because of the variety in sports books available for young adults, these will be found all over your collection. Sports novels are about characters involved in different sports. These can be suspenseful or about coming-of-age experiences. There are several great sports novels out there that are written about female protagonists, but historically, this has been a more male-dominated subgenre. I do think you'll see that this is changing, though. Here are some titles just to show you the variety available. John Feinstein and Mike Lupica both had careers as sports writers before writing young adult titles. Tunis has been around a long time. I believe he's deceased now, but he and John Ritter are known for being prolific baseball novelists. On your screen, you will see a selected list of sports biographies. I cherry-picked these to show you the variety of sports covered. Boys in the Boat is about a crew team in the 1936 Olympics. This one is a more recent title and was written more for adults, but it's one of these books that is in the Alex Award category and popular with teens. I read this novel, and I recommended it to several friends. It is an incredible book, and one I hope you get a chance to read. The next one is about a female kayaker. Then LeBron James, who you know is an outstanding basketball player. Another basketball book discusses the history between Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. You can see the range of all kinds of sports topics out there featuring male and female protagonists. Booklist also does a top 10 sports books for youth, and that comes out every September. The most recent one available is for 2017. Then there's the Public Library of Massachusetts that has a list. I love the way they lay it out. It's called Game On, and you can look books up by sport. If you have a student that has a passion for a certain sport, you might want to check out that website and see if you've got any of the titles they list available for them.